2032. This is a 1-hour session featuring presentations by Dr. Philip Christensen, co-chair of the Decadal Survey from Arizona State University, and Dr. David H. Smith, study director of the Planetary Science and Astrobiology Decadal Survey, the National Academy Space Studies Board. The session is being live streamed on the LPI YouTube channel, and also the session is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the program with closed captions in about 24 hours. The presenters will speak for up to 30 minutes, and they'll leave about 30 minutes for your questions. To ask a question, please enter it into the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And there, please identify yourself and your affiliation and indicate how to direct your question. You can post your questions at any time during the session. So let's get started. Phil and David, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to start off by, again, thanking Lisa and all the folks at LPI for inviting us to come and have this opportunity to give a status update on the Planetary Decadal. I'd also like to just say that my co-chair, Robin Canup, is unfortunately not able to join us today. She's on some family business, but she and I have been doing these sort of co-hosted discussions in a variety of venues and places, and so it's unfortunate that she won't be here today. You're going to be stuck listening to me for a while. And again, a big shout out to David and all the folks at the National Academy for all the work that they've been doing in getting us this far along in the decadal process. So we've given this talk a number of times, or versions of this talk a number of times. So I'm going to try to stress today some of the progress we've made, the status, where we are, try to anticipate some of the comments and questions we've been getting from the community, and try to give as much feedback as we can on the process and how it's going and our status and where we are. Just to start off, and again, I think many of you know this, what is a decadal survey? What is the purpose of this activity? There are a variety of goals, one of which is to just assess the status of the discipline, what we know, what we've learned in the last decade, just where we are as a community. As we'll hear more later on, we put a lot of effort into really defining and prioritizing the key scientific questions, in particular focusing on those that we can make progress on in this next decade. Number three, then, once we've identified those key questions, what are the initiatives that NASA can do in the next decade to address those questions? And those initiatives cover a broad range of topics. People oftentimes think of missions, but we're also looking at research opportunities, research questions, technology development, infrastructure, all the other things that we need as a community to make progress on these really exciting key questions. This activity is conducted by the National Academies, and I think that's incredibly important. It's done entirely independently of NASA and NSF. So it's truly an independent assessment and set of recommendations. As part of that, as you'll hear more, we do have to follow the National Academy's policies and guidelines, and there's some very, important guidelines that govern what we can and cannot do. NASA and Congress have required this activity, and experience has shown over the last 20, 30 years that this is an extremely important process. It feeds very definitely into NASA's plans for what they're going to do. And as you see there at the very bottom, they really are an important part of how Congress views NASA, and Congress takes and NASA take these recommendations very seriously. So all of us, the 95 plus members of this process, are taking that extremely seriously, and really understand and appreciate the role that we play in listening to the scientific community and then formulating some guidelines that give NASA its roadmap for the next decade. I think it's also very important. This process is really driven by what's called the statement of task. It's on the Academy website, and it's a very structured discussion of exactly what we're supposed to do, things we're not supposed to cover, and so to some extent, well, to a major extent, that document really guides our thinking and our process and the topics that we're delving into, and it outlines exactly what our two sponsors, NASA and NSF, want this committee to do. So if you haven't, I suggest you take a look at that website and really get, because it does, we get questions, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? We have very definite guidelines that we're following. Is what we've been asked to do. In the previous decadals, including the visions and voyages of 10 years ago, those were driven, the report was driven largely by destinations. So, there was a Mars chapter and a outer planets chapter, satellites chapter. This time around, this report and our discussion and our thinking is really being organized by key science questions rather than destinations. We've begun with a set of panels that are destination based. You'll see those in a minute. But each of those panels then has been discussing and putting forward the set of key science questions. And so we're going through right now a process of sort of restructuring internally. So as the destination panels now are being reorganized into writing groups that are going to address these key science questions. And I'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. We've been asked specifically to have a higher profile for astrobiology, and also to take a very deep look at planetary defense. We've been asked to come up with very specific decision rules that allows NASA, that helps NASA make the choices as the inevitable changes in the environment occur over the next decade. We've been asked to look closely at the connections to human exploration, and also other partners. We've been asked to look very carefully across NASA so that this isn't just a planetary focus, but looking how can we interact with other divisions, other directorates, other federal agencies, our international partners, and then the private sector. And we're taking all that very seriously. We really are, space science and space exploration is changing, and it will continue to change. And the partners that we have are going to be constantly evolving over the next decade. And as we've talked about at a number of these town halls, we've been asked to give very careful consideration to the state of the profession. Again, I'll say more about that in a minute, but we're taking that extremely seriously. And so we're really trying to look at how we can formulate recommendations that not just address the science aspect of our profession, but also the health of that profession and the nurturing the people that do what it is we do. As I said, we've begun with this series of panels organized by destination, but we are evolving into this how the report is going to be organized. We show sort of 5 representative boxes here, but there are more questions than that. So we were coming up with a set of science questions. In addition, there will be chapters on the state of the profession, technology, and what technology development needs to occur. There'll be a chapter on planetary defense. All these various topics are being covered, and we're putting together writing groups to lead the discussion and the writing of those activities. So you can see there's going to be, a large number of chapters and hopefully a lot of information and thought included in this report. So the process, again, this is mostly about trying to let people know what the process is and what our status is. All of the panel members, and I'll show a slide in a minute that I'm going to leave up for a while to let you see them. All of those memberships are on the survey website. And I think this is one of the most important things that Robin and I and David want to stress. This group of individuals are the ones who represent you throughout this process. We're trying to be as open as possible, but it's those individuals that are your representatives in this decision-making process. We have been receiving a lot of input from white papers, open meeting sessions. We've been having inbounded talks, town halls such as this one. We've given presentations at the various analysis groups. And so we're very serious about really trying to get as much feedback as possible from you so that we're really representing the desires, goals, ambitions, objectives of our community. That's our job, is to represent you. Having said that, the National Academies does have very strict limits on what can be made public throughout this process. And that's done deliberately to ensure that this process remains independent and unbiased. And so, once our deliberations begin, there are, by the very nature, closed meetings and closed discussions. That's, intended so that we're not constantly being lobbied by, people throughout the world. Again, that's not to say that you can't call up people on the panel and talk to them and express your ideas. But for the next, 6 months or so, it's going to be more of a one-way process where information is coming into the committee that's being digested and listened to. But there's only so much information that we can give back during these deliberative process. We are receiving a lot of information, and trust us, we are listening very carefully to it. That website also contains detailed information about the panel meeting dates and their open meeting agendas. I do hope all of you are paying attention, listening on those open meetings. Again, we're trying our best to get information from the committee, the community, into us. So these are the 19 members of the steering group. This is a group that provides the leadership and makes the final tough decisions and recommendations. So they formulate those conclusions. We tried extremely hard to get a broad range of expertise, programmatic experience, balance among the members, geographic balance, institutional balance, topical balance. So we think we've done as good as you can to come up with an outstanding group of people who form the steering group, members. As I said, we started off with panels organized by destination. There's 6 panels this time. There were 5 Envisions and Voyages. These are those panel chair and vice chair. The vice chairs are also members of the steering committee. So you'll see their names show up there as well. And again, we think this is an outstanding group. I think a real strength of the current structure of the report by science themes is we're definitely observing much more cross-group discussion and interaction. I think by doing it by science themes, we're really avoiding the siloing that can occur when you organize primarily by destinations. So I think this process is actually working really well. I'm going to leave this slide up for a moment and really let you peruse it. Again, hopefully many of you have already looked at the membership of these panels. But as you can see, this is an outstanding group of people. Again, it represents a real diversity of our community. We have early, mid, and late career members. I think we have done a very good job of getting the scientific leadership, but we've also tried very hard to get leadership in other areas. And so many of these people are participating in the state of the profession discussions. They're participating in technology discussions. They're participating in RNA discussions. And so again, these are the folks that are listening to you and then talking amongst this group to come up with our recommendations. This is just a snapshot of the meetings that we've been having so far. We're actually having far more meetings than we did a decade ago for Visions and Voyages. That's partly just because how the process has changed. It's also partly because of the world we live in. But many of these panels have been having weekly or bi-weekly meetings. So you can see there's just been a tremendous amount of activity, and that activity is going to continue. The panels are continuing to have open meetings, and that will go on for many months as we continue to formulate input and discussion with the community. This is deliberately an eye chart. This was just me picking representative agendas from a single panel, in this case, Ocean Worlds and Dwarf Planets, showing the breadth and the number of meetings that they've been having. This group has been meeting about every 2 weeks since October, and they've been bringing in, a large number of people, white paper authors, the PIs of the planetary mission studies that were done, just really working hard to bring in expertise from outside the panel to share information and provide the inputs that we need for our deliberations and our decisions. So again, there's been just a lot of input, and this is just a single example from a single panel. So just a little bit on progress. Again, thank you very much. Over 500 white papers were submitted. We have read all of them. We divided them up on the steering committee, on the panels. All of that information has been read, discussed, shared, and so it was a tremendous volume of, it's a wonderful starting point for us in our discussion. We do have a draft outline of the survey. As I didn't mention early on, that as part of this process, we are required that any missions that we recommend at the flagship or the New Frontiers level, those have to be independently costed. And the contractor that will do that has been identified and is being brought on board. So that process is moving nicely. We also spent a lot of time, one of the reasons we started with a panel structure is so that we could really look carefully at the mission studies that had been done and identify any gap filling missions studies that we needed. And I'll say more about that in a minute, but we've identified 9 science and 1 planetary defense studies that are currently underway at the three different NASA centers. So just a couple words about that mission study process. We looked carefully at everything that was available. The ice giant study, the Europa lander study, the planetary mission concept studies, all the concepts and visions and voyages. We looked through that full set, and the panels then went off and identified what was missing. What did we need in addition to all of that study work that had been done? And so the panels formulated, it's about 15 gap filling concepts, places where we needed more information. Some of those were inspired by the white papers that you wrote. Others came out of visions and voyages. Some were related to the concept studies that had been done, but were descopes or reprioritizations or subsets that we wanted to have a sense of, what would it cost if we did only this part. Some came from just one panel. Numbers were, several panels got together and put forward concepts. We asked each group to put together a detailed questionnaire, including a science traceability matrix. And all that information came to the steering group in early December. And from that, we ranked them and spent a lot of time discussing and ranking them, and sent the top 9 out to NASA in mid-December. And Lori Glaze then assigned those to the 3 different centers. In addition, since that time, we've added a 10th study, specifically a planetary defense study, and that's also out being looked at. Each one of them, each team includes a science champion. It's just a member of the decadal panel, much less formal role than the PIs on the PMCS studies. This is just someone whose job it is to ensure that as the study moves forward through the centers, it remains faithful to the original science goals. Those final reports will be delivered late March, late April timeframe. And then from those, we will prioritize those along with all of the other missions that we had been studied in the past. And the priority list of those then will be sent out to this for independent cost analysis. As I said, anything at the flagship or New Frontiers level needs that analysis. At the discovery level, we don't prioritize or rank those concepts, so they don't need to go through this independent external process. Continuing with our progress to date, we've been asked to come up with cross-cutting themes and priority questions. We've identified 12 key questions, and those are organized by science themes. We obviously didn't do that in a vacuum. A tremendous amount of work has gone on in the last 20 years to define what those science questions are. And we clearly started with, the various analysis groups, LEAG, MEPAG, OPAG, et cetera. All of those groups have been spending a lot of time coming up with key questions. So we drew heavily on those and other sources, including Visions and Voyages. And we've now organized writing groups for each of those key questions, and the co-leads have been identified. These are the 3 themes. Again, shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. The origin of our solar system, the processes that go on in the solar system, habitability, life, all of those types of questions. So under these 3 themes, these are the individuals we've identified to co-lead those questions, chapters. And again, I hope you look at this list and have a sense of confidence that this is an outstanding group of individuals who will just do an outstanding job of leading the writing of these science questions. From those questions, again, the goal is to come up with the priorities of investigations that will go forward. And we've already seen, Robin and I, David, have seen this wonderful interaction where instead of individual destination panels all focused on their destination, we really are seeing a wonderful cross mix of people who are talking about how can Venus or the moon or icy worlds, how can those objects help us address these science questions? So I think we're seeing much less siloing and a much broader discussion, really focused on what are the key questions that we're trying to address, and then what is the best way for NASA to go about addressing them. We've also put together a current state of knowledge. That's part of our statement of task. That draft chapter is completed. We formed a cross panel writing group for the state of the profession. Mahzarin Banaji, who is a PhD sociologist, psychologist at Harvard, that we deliberately brought in to help us with the state of the profession discussion. She and Orlando Figueroa have done an outstanding job of organizing that group. They had their first meeting in early February and are continuing to have open meetings. So I think that group, the State of the Profession chapter, is in excellent hands and in excellent shape. We've also formed a number of other cross-panel writing groups. We have a planetary defense that's co-led by Paul Abel and Tom Jones. The RNA chapter is co-led by Vicki Hamilton and Paul Byrne. We've put together a Connections to Human Exploration chapter that Jennifer Heldman and John Grunsfeld are co-leading, and the others are, we're in the process of forming that. So I think we're making good progress toward, getting the writing started. And again, I think some extremely capable, talented people have stepped up and shown, been willing to take on the task of organizing this activity. I'll just leave this up. The key things, we're going to spend the spring and early summer prioritizing mission concepts. Our goal is to have final recommendations by September. The report goes out for review, or October, November timeframe. That review process through the National Academies is very thorough, and so that takes a fair amount of time to do. But the goal, the plan from day one, is to a year from now, back at hopefully a live version of this conference, we'll be presenting the formal recommendations that have come out of this process. So with that, I hope I've managed to give you a bit of an overview of where we are and what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I'll stop and open for questions.
Thanks very much, Phil. Right now we have 4 questions. I invite more questions there. We have one that's already been answered that I'll follow up with a little bit later. The first question is from Barbara Cohen, Goddard Space Flight Center, and for Phil. When will the actual white papers be available to the public? Right now, we can only see the Excel list of submissions. Will they be available when the report is published? And thanks for the work you're doing.
Well, thanks for all the work you're doing as well, Barbara, and everyone else. The white papers, if I understand it, and David, you can, I believe the white papers should be online and available. So if it's the white papers you're asking about, those should be available. That's a true statement, right, David?
Yeah, perhaps I should explain what's going on. When you click on that link, it downloads an Excel spreadsheet. You open the spreadsheet and go to the extreme right-hand side. There is a link, a unique link to each of the white papers submitted. So they are publicly available. There isn't a single place you can go to that downloads all the white papers. Just recently, we delivered copies of all of the white papers to the American Astronomical Society, and they have agreed to publish all of them in the Bulletin of the American Astronomical Society, except for those whose authors indicated that they didn't want them published, which was just a handful. So if you can bear with me 1 second, in anticipation of this question, I opened the spreadsheet, and if you go to column AJ, which is way over on the right-hand side, there is a link, and that link will take you directly to the specific white paper listed in the row you're in. So they are publicly available right now and will be printed sometime by the AAS.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
David. And there's a lot of information in there. I strongly encourage people to go peruse them. It's an amazing collection.
Thank you. Next question from Parvati Prem. Would it be possible for the academies or the Decadal Committee to set up and maintain a more accessible way, i.e. a single unified calendar to keep the community informed about dates and agendas for open sessions? Right now, this is almost prohibitively difficult to track. Lots of last-minute updates, many web pages, etc.
It is a complex process. We are doing the best we can to make it as easy to navigate as possible. As you can imagine, if you think back to that slide I showed with the number of, each panel is having meetings, we're having steering committee meetings, we're beginning to have, panel meetings that are related to individual chapters. There are many, many meetings, and I think the National Academies is doing the best they can to try to keep up with all those meetings. I hope you can appreciate, everyone in this process is essentially volunteering their time to do this. And so getting meetings organized, coming up with agendas, coordinating the speakers, that's a very complicated process. And each panel is sort of doing the best they can to get information out as quickly as possible. But again, there are last minute changes, there are last minute activities. It's just a complicated process to try to organize this many committees and subpanels and activities.
Yeah, let me just add something to this. I sympathize with the questioner's comment. The inflexibility of our current website is part of the reason for this. The other reason is the fact that we're having groups, some groups are meeting on a weekly basis, and we don't know what agenda topics they want to address until they've had one meeting. So there's less than a week to organize a meeting. Other groups are meeting every other week, every third week. We have every possible combination. We have invited presenters who tell us at the last minute that they need to change the time of their presentation or that they can't come. We have to add a substitute. So there is no way to keep these things immediately up to date. In fact, I just asked earlier this week, one of our interns to generate a continuously updated version of the slide Phil showed, which showed all the meetings we've had. I put the original version together at the end of February to show at the PAC meeting on the 1st of March. And by the time I showed that slide, it was already out of date because a panel had scheduled a meeting for later that week that wasn't shown. So we have a very dynamic process got underway and we're doing our best. But I think maybe the simplest thing is if we tell people somewhere the formulas we're using for panel meetings. Mercury and the Moon, which I'm sure Pavarotti is most interested in, they meet every second Friday. Small Bodies meets every third Thursday. Ocean Worlds meets on Fridays. Venus, I think, meets on Mondays. That's the way we're working. So yeah, we're doing our best, but we can't keep up.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Next question from Ryan Watkins, NASA headquarters. Are the 9 additional mission concept studies public? i.e., is there somewhere to find information on those?
At the moment, as part of the decadal process, they are not. Again, that has to do with sort of the confidentiality of how we're treating this process and the rules that we are living under. Once the study reports are done, they will be included in the final report, and so those studies will be available then. But as they're ongoing activities and our deliberations are ongoing, our prioritizations are ongoing, at the moment they're not public.
Thank you, Phil. Next question from Alfred McEwen. What is the process for selecting reviewers for the draft Decadal Survey?
I'll leave that to David.
Okay, so the academies have an established process for selecting reviewers for all of its reports, and it's as with everything we do, it's complicated, but we use basically the same process we use to appoint committee members. So somebody like me, who is a staff officer running a study, when it comes to the review phase, or in fact months before we get to the point where a report's ready to review, there are certain things we do. We have to fill out a form that tells the Academy's report review committee that a report is coming. We give them a schedule that automatically triggers a set of emails that go out to the various sections of the Academy. So the Academy members can volunteer, and that's one piece of input. We also take suggestions from the members of the committee. Who do you think is an appropriate reviewer? We ask related groups like the Space Studies Board, Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science. People in the community, if they want to suggest reviewers or volunteer to be reviewers, they can send those in through the public comment link on the Decadal Survey webpage. And then the plan then is we put together a balanced set of reviewers whose expertise mirrors that of the authoring committee. So we won't have 95 reviewers, but we could easily have 20, 25 reviewers. And their expertise will basically mirror the expertise of the Decadal Survey group. And there'll be somebody in it, somebody there who is an expert in every single topic we're addressing in the statement of task. And some of them will be more generalists who look at the overall report. Others will have very specific knowledge on specific aspects of the report.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
Paul Byrne added a comment, FYI, the Venus panel meets every second Wednesday and is holding a series of open sessions from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern. The next Venus panel meeting is next Wednesday, March 24th. A notice for each open session will feature in the Planetary Exploration newsletter.
Thank you, Paul. And again, thank you for all the work that you and your committee is doing. I wanted to tack on a quick comment to David's comment. I think one of the things that Robin and David and Colleen and Mia, everyone involved in this process really is trying to stress is our goal is to make the best possible report that we can and provide the best possible guidance and, really, put forward ways, how can we advance planetary science in the next decade as in the best way possible. So in putting together the panel, in putting together the report, and in reviewing the report, we really are looking, the goal is to end up with as high a quality product as we can at the end. So again, that's going to be looking to great reviewers who can, really make sure that we've done our job.
Thank you, Phil. Another question from Brad Jolliffe, directed to Phil, regarding the ask to look closely at connections to human exploration activities by NASA and its partners. What exactly does that mean? If a science priority can be in part addressed through planned human activities, What does that mean for possible robotic missions that might interact synergistically with the results of the human activities?
I think that's exactly the type of things that we're discussing. You know, are there ways to augment the science by a combination of robotic mission and human activities? You know, how can we get the best scientific return? You know, looking broadly beyond just the traditional NASA robotic missions. And so I think, you know, even our reaching out to the private sector, are there ways that NASA can, you know, expand the amount of science that we can do? So I think what we're looking at is exactly where your question was headed, Brad, is that, you know, how can we get better science by combining robotic with human activities, and seeing that as a joint activity as opposed to two isolated sets of activity. So those are the type of things that writing group is just beginning to really address and discuss.
Thank you, Phil.
Next
question. I'm sorry, David.
I was going to add that one of our mission concepts we're looking at is we chose it specifically because there is potentially a lot of human exploration synergy with it.
Thank you. Next question from Catherine Elder at JPL. Will Mars sample return be prioritized above the new concept studies, PMCs, Ice Giant study, and Europa Lander study, or will the scientific merit and cost of all these concepts be considered equally?
So we've been having a lot of discussions, both within the Mars panel and within the steering group in open session about Mars sample return. If you read the statement of task, we were not asked to reprioritize Mars sample return in terms of its, you know, relevance to other science activities. We have been asked to look very carefully at the program, evaluate it, look at potential changes to the architecture, potential descopes, potential upscopes. So we're giving it a lot of thought and attention, but we were specifically asked not to go back and reprioritize the science of that endeavor relative to other activities. We are paying very close attention as we put together the programmatic balance that we've been asked to do. We're paying very close attention to the projected costs of MSR. But you know, what we're trying to come up with then is a balanced program that takes into account the realities of the major missions that are ongoing, Mars sample return, Europa Clipper, and then also factors in what new initiatives can we prioritize for the coming decade.
Thank you, Phil. Question from Margaret Landis, CU Boulder. While it is undoubtedly challenging to conduct a decadal survey during a pandemic and a testament to the hard work of the panelists and NAS, the events of the last year has affected the ability of the community to participate for an unprecedented and wide variety of reasons. Will these effects be captured in the final report?
We certainly appreciate the stress that the last year has put on our community, on the members of the panel and on the members of the broad science community. We're doing everything in our power to mitigate those effects. So if you remember back to when the white papers were due, we took that into account. We delayed when they were due. We staggered when they were due to, you know, the last possible time where we needed that input. So all through this process, we're trying to take that into account. recognizing that it's, you know, it's challenging for people to participate, to get input. This is an excellent example. I mean, a year ago, I would have been presenting, and we could have had, you know, hallway conversations for the next 3 days about, you know, just about the process, and could have been a much more interactive. We're doing the best we can, but I will say, you know, one of the things we recognized from the beginning, we think it's essential that this report be delivered on time. I think everyone's well aware of the pressures that are on the federal budget, the pressures that have come from every aspect of life that are putting pressure on the federal budget, the NASA budget, the inefficiencies. So we think it's essential that Planetary Science have a excellent, crisp roadmap for how NASA should proceed, and that should be available next March so that it can influence and be part of the budgetary process going forward. So we're doing what we can. We're trying to have, again, these open Zoom meetings, meetings like this, but there's only so much we can do and still maintain the end goal, which is to get this report into the hands of the decision makers who then are going to use it to set the NASA budget going forward.
Thank you, Phil. Question from Carol Benignus or Benignus. Dr. Christensen, does your team address engagement with young people, specifically high school students? As an informal educator, I led students to participate in the Mars Student Imaging Project you created in 2003. Since then, 60 of my high school students have published abstracts at the LPSC, conducting real science and interacting with real scientists. Such experience is invaluable, and thank you for all your work.
I obviously have had a long career of being very concerned about engaging the next generation in our field. I think that's, you know, it's essential for us to continue to engage, you know, middle school, K-12 students so that they see the excitement of what it is that we do. Those kind of discussions, I think, are appropriate, you know, for the state of the profession. That's a broad topic, and we're looking at it very broadly. Obviously, there's the key issues of inclusiveness and equality, etc. But we're also worried, where are the next generation going to come from? How do we inspire the youth of this country to go into this profession? How do we get the right institutions? How do we broaden the institutions that are training the next generation of students? So we're treating as I said, we're treating the state of the profession extremely seriously, and we're looking at all sorts of ways in which NASA can grow, nurture, and maintain a very dynamic, robust, healthy, vibrant workforce.
Thank you, Phil. Question from Josh Cahill at APL. Is Arecibo and/or the potential for a replacement being considered in the deliberations despite it going offline in December 2020?
That is certainly being discussed. That was a real tragedy, a real disappointment. That is a topic of discussion. We'll see where that ends up in recommendations, but we are certainly discussing it.
Yeah, and I add that the panel on small solar system bodies held a open session related primarily to planetary radar facilities, but Arecibo featured heavily in that, and those presentations are all available on the Decadal website. That was held sometime last year, maybe November or December.
Yeah, it's definitely
Yep.
it's a great loss, and it's going to be an important for us to, at least try to formulate ideas of how to move forward.
And of course, it's part of the Astronomy Decadal Survey, which is, a year ahead of us in terms of their schedule. Well, 6 months ahead of us now. And they'll be coming out long before our report. And I'm sure they'll have something to say about Arecibo and radio astronomy in general.
Thank you. This is more a comment from Donna Thompson. All of the ones, I believe that's white papers published in the BAAS, will be available through the ADS abstract service as well. Is that familiar to you all?
I don't actually know the answer to that one.
Okay.
I presume they would be if it's published in BAAS. Then it would be, at least the abstracts would appear in the ADS, and probably a link to the full text. But I don't know the answer to that one. Maybe one of my colleagues could answer in the chat, and I could relay it.
Question from Wes Patterson, directed to Phil. Since you weren't asked to consider reprioritization of MSR, can you clarify the committee's current understanding of the prioritization for MSR with respect to other priorities in planetary science? I.e., there was a lot of concern when MSR was presented for the current decadal that the community would be obligated to support it in subsequent decadals. My recollection of the response to that concern was that there would be no explicit priority in subsequent decadals for the remaining potential options in the initially proposed MSR architecture. Is that the direction the committee is working under? Wes Patterson from APL.
Thanks, Wes. Again, there's a fine line, I guess, between reprioritizing, which we are told not to do, but then also look at the program, and it's in the purview of, it's in our statement of tasks to say we can recommend descopes to that program. We can recommend upscopes to that program. So I think, if after lots of deliberation, if the steering committee felt that the program was not providing strong science benefit, we can certainly comment on how the scope of that program. We've been getting a lot of presentations, a lot of information. NASA obviously is moving forward with that program. It's now in phase A for the sample return. Memorandums of understanding have been signed with ESA for their participation. So there's obviously a lot of activity going on, but it is in our purview to comment on what we think of the appropriateness of that program.
Thank you. Parvati notes that a thanks to David and Phil for those helpful responses. This is on the schedule. Appreciate it's difficult, and we could all probably do with fewer meetings. I was thinking that having the open meetings so hard to track seems to partly defeat the purpose of making these public. Maybe even something like a Google Calendar could help, but we appreciate your efforts and responses.
There's nothing I would like more than to have everyone in the community know when every public meeting was happening. I have felt throughout my entire career, and certainly through this process, that the key to success is really having community buy-in to these processes. We're going to come up with recommendations, and they won't make everyone happy. That's just the nature of prioritizing activities. but there's certainly the opposite of us trying to, make it difficult for people to find out what's going on. And again, we would love to have as much participation as possible. So like David, I share the frustration with how difficult it can be sometimes. But it's certainly not, there's no intent there to try to make it difficult. It's just the reality of the systems that we live in.
Thank you, Phil. So we've come to the end of our questions, unless someone else wants to enter another one. Are there any more topics, any other things you want to mention before we end the session in a few minutes?
There aren't, other than, again, who's on this committee, reach out to them, talk with them. It's kind of a one-way diode, but we're really looking for a continuation of information flowing into us. We are here to listen and do the best we can to sort it all through. And I sincerely hope that a year from now, Robin will be doing most of the talking, and we'll be presenting our findings in person, live. And I hope that we can come up with a set of recommendations that really will benefit and strengthen our community and the science that we do. So I do hope to see you all soon.
Yes, thank you, Phil. It's a good point to make, that we hope to be doing this live this time next year. One comment from Brad Jolliffe, partly in conclusion: thanks to Phil, David, and the entire committee. This is a huge and important task you're undertaking.
And just in an answer to Abby Freeman's question, yeah, that link periodically gets broken and we'll get it fixed. I don't know. I don't check it every day, but we'll get it fixed. And if anybody really wants to see the white papers right now, they can send me an email and I will email the spreadsheet to them.
Thank you, David. David is referring to a question about the lack of availability of the spreadsheet that was mentioned earlier. We do have one additional question from Shoshana Cole at SSI. Pre-COVID, there was a plan for graduate students to be involved. Is this still happening?
That was something we had hoped to do. We did that during Vision of Voyages. It worked out very well, but we were overtaken by events. We never considered the case where we were having so many meetings. We would have needed dozens and dozens of note takers. And it just became impossible to contemplate it anymore. But yeah, that's unfortunate, but that couldn't be.
I think for me, it's one of the real tragedies of this process that, again, building the next generation is crucial to what we do. And it's a real shame that hasn't been able to happen. Because again, giving people, seeing how this process works is extremely valuable. But it's unfortunate.
And we do actually have some up and coming people working on the survey. We have some of us. Our winter intern, who's still lingering with us, is working and helping the survey. We hired a grad student from George Washington University to help with the state of the profession group because they have a lot of data analysis they need to do. So we're using people as we can, but we didn't put out a general call as we had planned. So
thank you, David. Thank you, Phil. We're coming to the end of our hour, if we haven't already. So I really appreciate your time today, the speakers and the attendees. Thank you for all the excellent questions. And thank you, David and Phil.
And Robin.
And Robin, yes. Thank you.
And Colleen. And Mia. The list goes on.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time today.
Bye, guys.